Nay. Easiest nay.
That was quick. I'm going to say yes with a caveat. Welcome back to On Deadline. I'm Christian Daytalk.
And I'm Tiana Low-Desher.
Each week, we check out the biggest news in politics, deliver our takes, and then you get to vote on a winner at the end. Don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share it with your friends. As we do every week, we're starting Above the Fold. It's a segment where we both get a minute to make our case for the biggest story in politics. Tiana, what's on your mind this week?
Mike Johnson pulled off the political magic trick of getting the One Big Beautiful Bill passed through the House by a one-vote margin. Now it's up to the Senate to fulfill Scott Bessent's deadline for the Senate to pass on the One Big Beautiful Bill to Trump's desk by Independence Day. But what are they waiting for? House conservatives are correctly pushing the Senate to further trim the bill to cut $1.7 trillion over the decade. Why? Because according to dynamic scoring, that's how much the bill would currently add to the deficit. So yes, you do want to speed up those dates where we overturn the Green New scam passed by Joe Biden, Medicaid work requirements. But there's trouble in the Senate. You have the so-called Medicaid moderates, including Josh Hawley, who claims to be a conservative, saying they don't want to defund Obamacare. You have Ron Johnson, who says he wants to go line by line of the federal budget to bring spending back down to pre-pandemic levels, which is, in fact, a cut to entitlements like Social Security, which Donald Trump has said he will not do. So what are you waiting for? Work with the bill that you already have. Because guess what? We are over 4 months into this administration, and the Senate hasn't actually brought up a real alternative. They're trying to live in a world where they get to reauthorize a bill from scratch, even though tick-tock, the deadline is coming.
Tiana, there's a lot going on with this entire piece of legislation. First and foremost is Mike Johnson on Monday morning saying they might introduce a new reconciliation bill. It seems like Republicans just don't have any idea what's going on. And I want to ask you the heart of this question being, is Donald Trump to blame? Because on the one hand, he has been consistent and said, I'm not going to approve, wholesale slashing of Social Security or Medicare. He's got these red lines out there. But late last week, when asked about this in the Oval Office, he basically said, so is this a problem created by the leader of the party, and Mike Johnson and probably House Republicans are going to deal with those negative impacts come 2026 when they either haven't reauthorized these tax cuts, or this bill has turned into something which actually pisses off the hardcore conservatives because spending is ballooning. Is that the track we're on right now?
I mean, yes. So Trump is just the symptom of the Washington problem, which is that the imperial presidency has been designed by Congress because Congress doesn't want to do its job, right? It's why you had Doge able to come in and overhaul the entire federal government, because guess what? If Congress wanted to actually do its job and enshrine these positions, they could, but they don't, right? So with Trump, you see how auxiliary the legislation is, or the legislature as a body is fundamentally auxiliary to Washington in general. We saw it with Joe Biden, how much of his administration was just done via executive fiat. Trump, the tariffs, the trade war, so much of it just done by executive fiat. Like, people don't really want to work with Congress, even though this is where the sausage is made, right? You cannot change any of the mandatory spending that comprises about 3/4 of our annual outlays without legislation. And so, look, if President Tiana Desher were in office.
First female president, perhaps.
Yes. And Ron Johnson came to me by saying, I want to bring back spending down to pre-pandemic levels. President Desher would want to put Ron Johnson's face on Mount Rushmore, because I know what that means. What that means is, jacking up the retirement age for Medicare and Social Security to at least 70 and dramatically reducing outlays. And that is something that, I think needs to be done. But Donald Trump has already said that's a non-starter. So when you hear Johnson say back down to pre-pandemic spending, all of the increase in spending since COVID has been because of the structure of entitlements, right? There is no magic third bill that allows you to have your cake and eat it too. And that's just the reality. And this is why the Medicaid moderates are so off their rocker. You guys don't want, so right now the red line that Hawley has said, because he's saying, maybe the work requirements are okay, but the red line is changing the funding mechanism where when Medicaid was originally designed, it was supposed to be roughly a 50-50 partnership of 50% federal spending, 50% state spending. With the Obamacare expansion, those able-bodied, childless, young adults, people our age who don't have kids, they don't have to work. They get Obamacare, and the federal government pays 90% of their health expenses. So, you have some people like Chip Roy saying, why don't we just make it so that way, the impoverished, the disabled, single young moms, why don't we make it so way they get at least as much money as we give Obamacare members? And they're saying that's the red line. So if Republicans can't even defund like 1% of Obamacare, can we do anything?
It seems like not. I mean, I would argue we've seen this for countless cycles now, dating back to when the ACA was enacted. Republicans are first going to repeal and wholly replace Obamacare. Then they're going to amend it. And now they're
skinny repeal.
Yeah, exactly. It seems like, where the pavement meets the road is where they have problems. And obviously campaigning is one thing, but governing has proven across, majorities on both sides of the aisle to be much harder than it appears on the campaign trail, I think.
Yeah, and let me just point out, a conservative movement where Obamacare expansion funding is a sacred cow is not a conservative movement I want any part of. Christian, what's the top story you're following this week?
Well, Democrats' latest efforts to rebound from the 2024 election loss prove they still just don't quite get the problem. So over the weekend, we had news that a group of Democratic operatives are pouring $20 million into a strategic partnership to, quote, to study the syntax, language, and content that makes them able to communicate with young men. This is offensive for any number of reasons. First and foremost, you're talking about a party that just raised $1 billion. This is something you're supposed to be serious about, and you're only spending $20 million of that? Count me out. Second of all, I think they need to take a look at the voter shifts over the last several elections. Donald Trump, in 2024, overperformed Kamala Harris among young men 53 to 45%. He had roughly a third of young black male voters, he had 50% of Latino male voters, and roughly 2/3 of young white male voters. But Harris still overperformed the levels that Joe Biden was polling at earlier in the cycle. So this isn't necessarily like a patriarchy or a sexism problem, which I'm not saying those don't exist, but Democrats need to just pump the brakes and stop playing identity politics. All of the young men I've talked to about the 2024 election say, we are tired of being otherized. Treat us like you treat the rest of the country. We care about the economy and we care about the government staying out of our personal lives. The Democratic Party needs to look at how they are running the entire operation instead of drilling down on all these different subsets within their so-called Big Tent party.
Christian, the moment I knew Kamala Harris was going to lose the election, which I always maintained, anyone following Biden in the Democratic Party had a dramatic uphill battle just because the original sin was the ARP spending, which lit the economy on fire and created the worst inflationary crisis in 40 years. But after Harris got in, and you had the media love affair, just the words I can't say on television, Brat Summer, the massive psyop that was J.D. Vance's weird, whatever. The moment I realized, oh no, this isn't going to work, she will lose, Trump will win, was when she released her plan for black men. And her plan for black men was federal weed legalization, easier at-home sports gambling, and all the PACs started running the ads saying, get Republicans out of your bedroom, protect pornography, and protect abortion. Your view of men, and of black men in particular, has to be so rock bottom. You have to, I mean, that's just contempt, right? If you think the most important thing, what will drive men to the polls is porn, weed, and sports gambling. Like, it's quite frankly, you know, the inverse of the problem that historically parties have had with women, right? So I went through a couple of polls of how the party voters feel about masculinity. You had, so first of all, men in general, so 2/3 of men view the Democratic Party unfavorably. That's Quinnipiac. But there was this Pew poll right before the election that showed that 53% of Republican men consider themselves highly masculine, but only 29% of Democratic men do. And to me, that doesn't tell me how masculine the men actually are. That tells me what they think is socially acceptable to say, because we know that a bias in polling is you don't want to say something that you think could reflect poorly on your character to a pollster, right? Even if you think it's anonymous, you know it's going in somewhere. That tells me that Democratic men are scared to say that they're very masculine because they somehow view this as a bad thing. Nearly half of all Democrats say that our culture places too much value on men who are assertive, confident, and risk takers. To me, those are all three values I think of as positive forms of masculinity that, as long as they're channeled in a virtuous way, that's what, it was assertive, confident risk takers who stormed the beaches of Normandy and made sure that Europeans weren't speaking German for the next 100 years, right? It's positive masculinity that has all those traits. It's so, the joke is always, oh, the liberal version of Joe Rogan is Joe Rogan, but it's a oft repeated joke for a reason. And the fact is, there is I don't know if it's the groups, I don't know if it's academia, I don't know if it's just a selection bias of women and gay men are, more likely in DC to be the top level comm staffers for Democrats. But there is just the fact that in the Democrat parlance, in Democrat circles, it is somehow viewed as a bad thing to be a bro.
Yeah,
And that's such a fundamental problem. I don't know how you can pay your way out of that, is my point. You can develop better policies, but how do you just change a cultural attitude of it's bad to drink beer with your bros?
It starts at the top, really, and I think the problem is not necessarily that they've demonized masculinity specifically, but it's how you view the country and where we are right now. Donald Trump, for all the lies he spews, he's constant about the fact that America is exceptional, you are exceptional, and we're going to get somewhere we haven't even been before. It's going to be beautiful, baby. You're going to love it. So much winning. Democrats, on the other hand, I feel like over the last decade, their campaign message has been the country is in turmoil and we have to do something about it. And all of these things are problems, including you and how you think and how you behave and how you act or vote, right? We need to strip all of these dividers out of politics if we really want to pursue policy that helps the entire country, right?
It does. We
Again,
need a viable opposition party. This is not a sustainable state of affairs to have a Democratic Party that is this incompetent
100%.
and hated.
And look,
if 2/3 of men don't like you, that's not a party.
no.
That's maybe a movement, you could call it, I don't know, a club. But you cannot have electoral viability in this country if 2/3 of men think that you hate them. And I after the Tim Walz thing, when they were trying to gaslight us into thinking that Tim Walz was some sort of paragon of masculinity and J.D. Vance was weird, I was like, oh no, you actually have a contemptuous view of American men. And I think that's really sad. Time for yays and nays, where we give our opinion on the news of the week. Sometimes we'll agree, but other times we'll disagree.
After the attack in Boulder, Democrats will take their anti-Semitism problem seriously.
Nay. Easiest nay.
That was quick. I'm going to say yes with a caveat. They have to take it seriously. Otherwise, we're going to see more deaths. And look, to be quite frank, this is an issue which potentially killed Joe Biden's hopes of a second term. Certainly didn't help Kamala Harris get over, the hole that Biden dug in her. But the entire handling of the Israel-Gaza war has been reprehensible, in my opinion, both by Hamas and by Israel and by the people sort of messaging around the outsides. Because two things can be true at the same time. It's terrible what Israel is doing to the Palestinians, and there is a militant group of Palestinians and their supporters who not only want to destroy Israel, but are willing to inflict pain on Jews and their supporters in other countries as a means of sort of driving that movement along. Whenever you have people dying and you have the killers yelling on camera, this is because of Palestine, down with Zionists, down with Israel, it's kind of hard to be like, yeah, we don't know what his motive is, right? This is so glaringly obvious, and we've tried to both sides this for so long. Like, there is no space for political violence in America. Full stop, end of sentence. And we sort of, the Democrats, played footsie with the idea that, no, they're just protesting. We've gone beyond the pale. This is no longer protest. This is terrorism.
Yeah.
And unless you unless you start, really cracking down on these people who, just because they're showing up to your organizing meetings and help you boost your numbers, they're going to hurt your goals in the long run. What are we doing here, people? I just don't understand.
The entire final decade of Joe Biden's political career was based on Charlottesville, that 2017 Unite the Right neo-Nazi rally with the tiki torches.
He told us about it in every single speech.
That was literally the basis of his entire final political campaign, the final act of his public life, of his 50 years in public life. And we now have a Charlottesville every week. We've had, firebomb some Jews, shoot them as they're crawling away.
Yeah, exactly.
Try and light the Pennsylvania governor's mansion on fire because the governor is an observant Jew. It is open season on Jews, and this has happened. It has not happened in a vacuum, right? I want to actually take the Gaza thing out of this because that's an excuse. I'm sorry. None of these people were involved with Netanyahu's government. Josh Shapiro, I believe, was born in America, right?
Yep.
The two Israelis that were murdered in D.C. were attending an event to promote peace in Gaza, talking about the end of the war, right? These were not members of the Netanyahu government.
Right.
The Boulder incident they were all marching to release the hostages. None of this has to do with the military operation of the IDF. And frankly, none of us understand the hell that is war, but specifically urban warfare, right? The urban warfare fatality rate always is very high. And it's very difficult when Hamas is the one that does not abide by the rules of war because they use civilians as human shields. It makes your operation very difficult. If you use your hospitals as arms depots, it makes it very difficult to avoid civilian casualties. Let's remove that from this because this isn't about Israel. It's about Jews. It's about anti-Semitism. It's about the fact that we have a growing and increasingly loud section of American life that thinks it is normal and okay to cheer for the murder of Jews on the basis of their Jewishness. The fact, every college campus in America is a breeding ground. I'm just trying to imagine if in the aftermath of 9/11, in response to the war, we had, little Al-Qaeda hotspots spring up at Harvard. And now, this latest shooter, terrorist, the Boulder terrorist, I'm just going to call him the Boulder terrorist, illegal immigrant, came during the Biden administration, and the Biden administration let him stay. But then I don't know what's scarier, the homegrown ones or the illegals? Because the illegals, at least, we will, I think for stuff like this, it's death penalty worthy.
So you really think after two of these, we'll call them terror attacks, the shooting at the Israeli embassy
I'd also
in DC.
count Josh Shapiro thing.
So three terror attacks in roughly the last month and a half. You don't think Democrats will turn the page here and be like, okay, this is actually a problem we have to address internally?
I want to be wrong. I also want to believe that the Josh Shapiro wing of the party will be ascendant and that it will make elections competitive again. But I just think the hand-wringing, the fact that the default position of Democrats is always based on what Trump does, if they let go of that impulse and stop just reflexively defending anything Trump targets, then maybe. But they have not broken that 2017 resistance era reflex, where that's just their instinct. So when Trump cracks down on these homegrown anti-Semites, think about the people that are the whole Mahmoud Khalil thing. I know you have made the case in terms of the legal argument protecting him from deportation, but I'm not talking about people who care about the process of law. I'm talking about the actual defenders of Mahmoud Khalil who's saying it's fine that he was celebrating after October 7th, which he was. And so, look, I think just if Trump weren't involved, if this were, 2021, maybe I would be a little bit more hopeful. And unfortunately, Joe Biden actually was pretty good at not sympathizing with Hamas fans, but like he's gone. So I don't. Is there any impulse control here?
I don't know. I mean, I think this sort of speaks to the root of the problem and what I was talking about at the top of the show.
Yeah.
Democrats are still living in the pre-Trump world.
Yeah.
And the country has changed, the world has changed, the Republican Party has certainly changed, and they aren't changing with it. And, you know, they're going to go the way of the dodo if they don't get their act together.
And there is, if there's one like through line through everything we've actually talked about today, which usually there isn't a theme other than
No.
like everything is dumb. But like if there was a theme, it's that Democrats for some reason have decided to complicate everything to the point that they can't see what's in front of their eyes so much of the time, right? After the Her report came out with Joe Biden, it was, well, Her's not a neurologist. I'm not a neurologist. With what is a woman? Ketanji Brown Jackson. Well, I'm not a biologist. Is it open season on Jews right now? Oh, let's put together a committee and figure it out. Like, no.
Let's pour $20 million into a study to figure out.
Why don't men like us? And just call it what it is. And leveling and being honest with the American people. That is half of the battle.
Yeah. Up next, it's time for us to fill in the blank.
Ukraine and Russia will reach a ceasefire by blank.
I don't have a real answer, so I'll say by the time Vladimir Putin dies, because he's probably not going to leave office before then. And look, for backstory, for those of you who aren't constantly watching the news like we are, this past weekend was extremely bloody in the Ukraine-Russia war. Russia launched roughly 48 hours of airstrikes at civilian properties in Ukraine starting around Thursday, followed up by what's being referred to as a semi-Pearl Harbor sneak attack on Russia's Air Force by Ukrainian suicide drones. It's wild. And, you know, Monday morning, the two parties were meeting in Turkey, trying to advance ceasefire talks. Of course, the Trump White House has already gotten Ukraine to agree to an immediate ceasefire. Russia is being Russia. And they made some progress. They agreed to exchange some 6,000 bodies of folks killed on both sides. But I don't feel like they made any actual progress towards ending the war.
I mean, we're talking about exchanging bodies of dead people.
Exactly, yeah. No, I mean, and I know you've got some stats about how big this strike from Ukraine was, because it feels like we've seen the Ukrainians sort of pepper strategic military sites across Russia. Nothing like this wholesale destruction that we saw over the weekend, correct?
Yeah. I mean, the difference between Ukraine and Russia is similar to the difference between Hamas and Israel. Russia intentionally goes after civilian sites, right? And Ukraine tries to go after strategic armament. And the difference between Russia and Gaza is that Gaza is very small and Russia is huge, which is why it's unprecedented what Ukraine actually pulled off. It was a mission that was a year and a half in the making. You had the estimate, I believe, is about $1 million worth of drones that took out $7 billion worth of bombers. So
it's good
30%.
ROI.
It's unprecedented ROI. It's an inflection point in asymmetric warfare that people who are much more advanced and involved in this space than I am have been talking about for a long time. At what point will technology make it so that way no longer is it just big power versus big power? You can have small powers that if they execute intelligence well, working off that intel, you can destroy a bomber, 2,500 miles away from the Ukrainian border, which is what they did in Siberia, in areas by Mongolia. And so it's a crucial psychological penetration of the Russian mission, because you can't propaganda that away from the civilians.
No, definitely not. They destroyed like 30% of their Air Force. I mean, it's a stunning blow. And to be honest, I think this actually probably, I'm loath to repeat Donald Trump's line that Zelensky is not helping things, but I think this is such a massive black eye, shout out Elon Musk, on the part of Vladimir Putin, that there's no way he can, go forward and actually bow this down, because it looks like he was bombed into submission, right?
Except this actually gets me to actually fill in the blank, that I think Ukraine and Russia will reach a ceasefire by force.
That's good.
Trump came in and he gave Putin a golden opportunity to keep, what is it, like 20% gains?
Yeah,
of
Crimea.
20% territorial gains. And Zelensky, recall, the whole reason why the Oval Office blow-up happened was because Zelensky wasn't budging on anything. He wanted, the verbal written commitment of security guarantee, all of that. And now he's saying, I'll do a 30-day unconditional ceasefire. He signed the Ukraine minerals deal. Like, he made plenty of concessions. Putin has been doing nothing, being late to meetings to call Trump, calling him from, elementary schools is like an inside joke, like Soviet-style inside joke. Now, I think the pressure is on, and Putin should know, if he hasn't figured it out already, that Trump is peeved. In my opinion, the White House saying that they didn't know about this is not true. I think it's important for, strategic ambiguity, but I think this was implicitly a green light from the Trump administration that we're back on.
I would agree with that specific assessment because just last week, we got the news that NATO, including the United States, had lifted all of its restrictions on the use of applied and supplied materiel to Ukraine to strike within Russia. There's no way they didn't come up during these talks, be like, oh yeah, by the way, we're planning this really crazy strike for like a year and a half, but now you guys are good with it. We're going to go ahead and go forward with it, right? It baffles me that the White House could be kept in the dark about this. That being said, I disagree with what you're saying about Trump perhaps forcing Putin into a ceasefire, because I think it's more likely that he walks away from this entirely, which would probably lead to the end of a sovereign Ukraine.
Yeah.
But based on the strikes on Russia's Air Force, perhaps not anymore. But it would certainly lead this into an even more protracted conflict than it currently is. We could be talking about the War of the Roses or the 40 Years' War. Shout out Helen Smith, my AP Euro history teacher back in high school. But I don't know. I feel like we're at a stalemate right now. And like Donald Trump says, every day where we're in this position, it's just death and death and death on both sides.
War is hell, and that's why you avoid it at all costs. We will see in the long run, like, this drone strike operation as such a turning point just in how war is conducted, because now no longer are the costs just on the battlefield, right? You always have the risk of our armament itself could be destroyed at any time, which this weekend, 30% of it was. Let us know who you think won this week's clash, and in the meantime, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this video with your friends. Drop your answer in the comments. My name is Tiana Lowe-Desher.
And I'm Christian Daytalk.
And we will see you on Deadline next week.